going to be preaching for the next few weeks on this particular sermon topic, and this sermon series is called
Game Changer.
Game Changer. It's great to change up the game every once in a while. Just, reevaluate and see if we need, sort of a chorus recorrection. So,
Yeah, no, that
recorrection
makes sense.
or just correction?
We can do both.
Okay. Well, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about this famous line from the movie Forrest Gump, and y'all probably know it. Goes something like this: "Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get." Well, over the next few weeks, we will be sharing some other cute little lines about life, about Christian life. You see, what this is, this game changers, we're going to look at games. And you probably know all the games that we're going to be talking about. But we're going to turn them into modern day parables.
Love it.
Parables are just basically stories about everyday, ordinary things of life, but they hold a deeper spiritual meaning. And Jesus used this technique when he was here on earth teaching his disciples and the multitudes. He spoke in parables, and we're going to share some new parables with you.
And these are games that you have probably either once played or still play. I mean, if you've got kids, or maybe you just have a family game night, these are things that, I think everyone, as soon as you see the game, you'll be like, oh yeah, I remember that game from wherever, fill in the blank.
Yep, for sure. So this week we're starting off with a game that you're probably familiar with, lots of fun. So we're going to start off with the Christian life is like a game of Kerplunk. You see, and there's two different ways that this holds true. Um, Pastor Peggy and I are going to take these two ways and each share one of them. I'm going to start off because the first way we're going to look at this is sort of an individualistic way, and it's about discipleship. So the Christian life is like a game of kerplunk. We accept Christ, we accept his forgiveness, and we accept his lordship. We determine to follow him. But here's the thing, we need to be discipled. Jesus tells his disciples to go and make disciples. So there's this process of learning that we need to go through to understand. Some people use different terminology. You may have heard the word catechism. That is a form of discipleship. Quite simply put, it is basically building a foundation. And some of this even happens before we become Christians. You see, these sticks in the game of Kerplunk represent things that we learn, truths of our faith journey, the dogma, the doctrine, the stuff that we need to know. Things like God created us and everything, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created. Things like humans sinned and that sin nature is passed down from generation to generation. Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Important things like God sent his son to bring redemption. We know that from John 3:16. And the list goes on and on and on of important things from the Bible that build our faith, build our philosophy of the Christian life or our theology. Some of these things are easy to accept and understand. And as the process goes on, we put in some sticks in the game of Kerplunk, and they go in real easy. It's very simple. One stick, it goes in, and another and another. But sometimes once we get a little further on in the discipleship process, um, it's a little bit difficult to figure out how does this truth fit in with everything I've learned so far. As I was putting the game together, like I said, easy. The first few sticks, they go in no problem at all. And then as layers build, it's harder to get those sticks to easily go from one side to the other. And the same is true in our discipleship journey. It might be harder to understand some of the deeper truths. Things like forgive others. Oh, sure, I can do that. Yeah, no problem. Love your enemies. Yeah, maybe. Okay, yeah, yeah. Bless those who persecute you. Little more difficult, isn't it? Forgiving, it's advantageous to us as well as the other person, but blessing those who persecute us, that can be hard. Those truths of discipleship are sometimes a little more harder to fit in as we work everything together. Jesus was fully God and fully man. How does that work? And probably the last stick that we put in as we're setting up this game is about the Trinity. You know what I'm talking about. I don't know how many times I've sat down and thought about and studied the Trinity, and I think to myself, okay, I understand this. And then the very next day it's like, I don't get such and such. Discipleship is really an ongoing thing, and it takes our whole lives. But when we're comparing it to the game of Kerplunk, that discipleship, it's putting those sticks in and building a foundation so that our life can be built on that. But here's the thing, something I was thinking about. Um, each time I put this game together, and I've done it 2 or 3 times now, um, it was different each time. Sometimes it was easy to fit those extra pieces in. Other times, oh, I was ready to just toss it across the room. And that sort of reminded me that we all learn at different different rates. We all learn in different ways, and that's okay. That's perfectly all right. The important thing is that we learn the important things. This learning time is important because it sets up for us the tone of our Christian life. It brings a maturity. 1 Corinthians 14:20 says, brothers and sisters, stop thinking like little children. In regard to evil, be innocent, but in your thinking, be adults. And then in Romans 12, verse 2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what the will of God is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. You see, this learning process is very important. And the Bible tells us we need to learn, we need to mature. So that is the putting the sticks in to build that foundation. And then we have the marbles. And the marbles are basically the items in our lives. I didn't know how else to put this, but the items in our lives, it could be our relationships, it could be our jobs or our hobbies or our possessions. They're neither good nor bad in and of themselves. They're just things that kind of make life a little bit more enjoyable. And resting on top of that foundation that we have built, the foundation is the philosophies, the theology that we have learned. And these other things are on top of that. So you see, the setup time is similar to that time that Paul spent away from teaching. It was after his conversion, and he spent 3 years doing a little bit more deep dive studying. Galatians 1:17 and 18 says, I did not go up to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before I was, but I went into Arabia. Later, I returned to Damascus. Then, after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Cephas and stayed with him for 15 days. You see, Paul, who was a Pharisee, he knew the Old Testament in and out. He still needed that time to grow his faith and to learn about Jesus and Jesus' teaching. And that is what we are doing when we are setting up the game of Kerplunk and putting those sticks in there in such a way. But then we start the game. Then we get into the ministry. And sometimes our truths get questioned. They could be questioned from outside sources, media, the world, the neighbors, who knows? They could be questioned by other Christians trying to help us to grow. There are some things that, well, there's still truth. They may not be foundational in holding up our lives. I think of a verse from Deuteronomy 24:5. It says, if a man has recently married, he must not be sent to war or have other duty laid on him. For 1 year, he is to be free to stay at home and bring happiness to the wife he has married. Now, this is truth from the Old Testament, but it's not necessarily holding a lot of bearing on our lives today. We can pull that stick out, and our lives are not going to tumble and crash to the bottom. You see, other sticks we might pull out, and it causes a little bit of a wobble. But things readjust, and we're good. It's not always a bad thing that marbles might drop to the bottom. Sometimes there's things in our lives that we just need to get rid of. Relationships that are not healthy, possessions that possess us rather than we possess them. It's not always a bad thing to prune out the distractions of life. But eventually, when enough of these foundational truths get pulled out and our theology is removed, everything comes crashing down and our life is a mess. Now, this modern day parable, we see that, first of all, discipleship is so important, that learning the truths of our faith, who God is and who we are because of him, what he has done for us, and how we are to live as a result of that knowledge. But we also see that sometimes these truths get yanked out by questions we have or others question us. And the thing is, here's where the analogy kind of falls apart a bit. In our lives, we can take these sticks out and examine the theology, and we can put them back in before any marbles fall. It's important to put back the truths and have it rightly adjusted to give us a good foundation. So the Christian life is like the game of Kerplunk.
I love that. And, as we were preparing for this, and we are different people, very similar theologies, but I seen the game a little differently. That's why there's a part 2 to this, and I love it. And maybe we can think about Kerplunk like this, as social justice. I love that. Some people are born with a disadvantage, and they don't even start with all the sticks, like here in North America and in Europe and places like that, where we have developed countries, we don't have to worry about clean water and electricity and things like that for the most part. And most people start on a fairly even playing field. And but some people are not born with a full stack of sticks, so to speak. So, you might be born to a single mom, or maybe a single dad, or maybe there's no social network, maybe there's no grandparents or extended family. Maybe there's been deaths in the family, or there's been trauma in the family, generational trauma, or different types of addictions, or whatever. We're not all born as heirs to the monarchy, basically. So, these having a certain amount of sticks already placed in the kerplunk, and then the marbles are your life. You have to, you may only have to pull out one stick, and all of a sudden marbles start falling through. So we're looking at this from a different perspective. You know, Many times when someone is born into a certain situation, they have an influencer that comes along to help them. For example, just I'm going to throw out three famous names. We have Walt Disney. Walt Disney wasn't born as the Walt Disney of the theme parks and everything like that. He was born into poverty. And with and I hope I'm pronouncing this name right. It's called UB Iwerks, maybe. He was a famous artist at the time, and Walt Disney, he was helping Walt Disney. Walt started out with a $500 loan, $500 loan from his uncle and his brother Roy. And that is the three of them together, working together with this $500, right? They were able to start this empire, or what we now know as the Seven Dwarves, Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. Albert Einstein is said to have been born with dyslexia. And they say that he didn't speak until he was 4 years old. He started school. He wasn't, most schools, memory and note taking, memory and note taking. But Albert Einstein was actually transferred to a school that focused on creative thinking and learning instead of memorization and note taking. And he had Marcel Grossman, Michael Bezos were his university friends, and together they worked together. But of course, Albert Einstein is the one that's known mostly for this work. And then we have another name that I'm sure a lot of people will recognize, and that's Helen Keller, born deaf and blind. And without Anne Sullivan, may have not done that much, but Anne was able to take and to mentor this young girl and teach her, be creative in her thinking, be creative in her learning. And Helen Keller went on to be a famous writer. And I mean, we all have quotes from Helen Keller, right? But we as Christians are God's representative. We are Christians. And when people are not born with all of the sticks, as God's representative, we should be stepping in and trying to help. And we have World Hope that helps bring clean water, education, healthcare to all kinds of places all over the world. And as the body of the church, and in unity with other denominations, we are in so many countries all across the world doing humanitarian work, missionaries under so many different banners, teaching, helping, healing, providing resources to those who are less fortunate. And that's all a part of social justice. we are helping sticking, almost sticking the sticks back into the game of Kerplunk so that the marbles of life can be held up. 2 Corinthians 5:20 says, "We are therefore Christ's ambassador, as though Christ were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf to be reconciled to God." And why is social justice important? Listen, I'm only going to read a couple of verses here from the Old and the New Testament, all about social justice. And this is only touching the tip of the iceberg when you consider social justice. We got Psalms 82:3. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Isaiah 1:17. Learn to do good. Seek justice, correct oppression, and bring justice to the fatherless, and plead the widow's cause. Proverbs 31, verse 9. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and defend the rights of the afflicted and needy. And then from the Old Testament, we have Micah 6:8. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. And now we look to the New Testament, James 1:27. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And then we have two quotes from Matthew 22, verses 39. And the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. And then Matthew 25:40. The king will reply, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. So what is the challenge here? What is the application from this modern day parable of social justice? Listen, it's not about survival of the fittest. We are a part of a bigger whole that seeks social justice. We are trying to bring clean water, education, skills, learning, healthcare to people all over the world. At the heart of the most of social justice issues is the hope that every individual can lead a fulfilling and a dignified life. It's not about me saying to someone, this is what your life should look like. It's about me saying to them, what do you want out of life? What can I come along and help you with? As God's representative, I want to help you live your best life. God wants that for me, he wants that for you, and he wants that for all of humanity. And as God's reps, so to speak, we should be a part of that process. Discipleship first, and then as the outflow of that, social justice and caring about God and about others.